Alright, so in this video I wanted to cover how you can use database objects potentially with different database engines. Um, and it does support, as I've mentioned before, SQL and MySQL and SQLite and a whole heap of others. But what I'm going to really focus on in this demo is in a situation where you might want to get some data from one database engine and some data from another database engine and merge that information together in some way. So basically create a cohesive model. Um, so I know that you can use, you might want to use linked servers which give you that ability. So the database engine is handling the connection to the other database and giving you a cohesive view at that level. Um, Perhaps sometimes that's not useful, it doesn't work. For whatever reason, database objects can give you that anyway. So what I'm going to do here, what I have done so far is I've created the Northwind database on MySQL. So if we have a look at MySQL, we've got the same data that we had in there before, but it's only has the categories and the products table. And if we go to the MySQL, SQL Server database, I've removed the those two tables. So there's no products, there's no categories tables in here. And so what we're going to do is link the two data sets together, I guess, databases together. So what I've done is in the Northwind model, now previously it was inheriting from Northwind model was inheriting from root container, but what I've done is basically created two root containers: the main database root container, which is the SQL Server one, and the products database root container, which just has the product information, which is just from MySQL, and it's going to have the products and the categories data in there. So if we have a look at that, we can see that we've got the products and the categories, and that's the only data in this root container. And in the main database, I've got everything else essentially. So the interesting part is that, say for example, we want to load an order. So an order has an order details, and order detail has a product on it. So that product needs to come from the other database, from the MySQL database. So that's the interesting part of it. But it's actually not that hard to do, because each root container has a link to a database, and each collection has a link to a database. So this suppliers collection, for example, has a link to a database. And these are all going to have links to the SQL Server database, and these collections all have link implicitly to the MySQL database. So it handles that sort of fairly well anyway. So now what I've done is basically created those two models, root containers, and then sort of allowed it to sort of link to each other. So there's the Northwind model here. So if I'm in the products, I can, using the get root container function, I can get back up to the products database, and then if I need to, I can get over to the Northwind and get to this other table over here, which is something I do need to do when I'm loading the order details. So that's essentially it. So all I've done is down here is create some wrappers, so it works as before. There's nothing particularly interesting about that. And so the interesting part is really in the order details. So basically using the compiler to sort this out, I've just gone through and fixed all the references. So these references here were previous. This was Northwind model, but now I've changed this to Northwind model main database, and I'm grabbing out the Northwind model and active products, getting the active products there. So the key thing here is that when I'm loading this order detail is in SQL Server, but when I want to load this product, it's going to load it from MySQL, and it's going to load it from MySQL because this active products is linked to the MySQL database. So it's all sort of automatic in a sense. Now, that's pretty much all you need to do. All I've done is change basically this root container. However, there is one caveat in that doing so, previously we had this enabled. Now this means that it's going to create an inner join with the order detail and the product tables, but because they're in different databases, we can't do that. So if I leave that on, I'll show you what error you get. But that's essentially all I've done. So there are a few other things in a few other classes but essentially all I was doing was changing this root container and changing it to the correct class. So it was actually fairly trivial and it took me 5 minutes to do. So if we go back to the application, we can see here we've got the products database is going to MySQL, and the main database is still SQL Server. What I've done here is I've put some, when I'm rewriting out the SQL statements that are being executed, I've just prefixed it with main and product so we know which database is actually being used. And yeah, so let's just run this far with loading the product. So if this is what we had before, this should load the product from the MySQL database. So if I run that now, you can see here the syntax is a little different, but it's essentially working, right? Now the tricky part is the order details, which should it should essentially handle itself. So if we run this, we can load up the okay, so this is the error that we're going to get because it's probably not the best error message, but you can see they're in the early reference, object reference early binding class. It's because it's trying to link the order detail to a non-existent product table. So if we take that out, obviously there will be ramifications in the sense that we're not doing inner joins and early binding, but if this is the situation, that's all you could ever do anyway, if you weren't using link servers. So go back to the application, run that again. So let's load up the order, and then we're going to load up the detail and just write out what that product name is. Cool, so you can see that it's loading the products. This is all from MySQL, and this is from SQL Server. So we're loading the order details, and when we're loading that product, we're growing off to MySQL and grabbing the product and putting that in there. So yeah, like I said, it is actually fairly trivial, even if you want to do this. But I just thought I just thought it was worth mentioning and demonstrating how you can do that.